Following is my conversation with Jeroen Vandermost. Jeroen is a technologist turned into a gifted artist, combining artificial intelligence, other technologies to create physical, digital art, all different types of embodiments, bringing artificial intelligence, consciousness, creativity, fusing it all together in an amazing way. And purposeful art, an art that helps us as people, as communities, as societies. Also, he is experimenting and innovating with human-computer interaction and innovative ways for human nature, computers, and computers in its more general form to come together and learn from each other. His art is giving a voice to objects in nature, like an island speaking for itself, or a forest speaking for itself. It's a fascinating conversation. We look at it from many different angles. We talk about his process of creativity as well. And then since Jeroen have worked with and works with businesses and government organizations and all that good stuff, so we talk about data visualization and business analysis and all those types of things as well, that how businesses who are working with a lot of data, how they can use some of this style of thinking to get better and really see their data and let the data talk, and many, many other amazing topics. Hope you find this conversation super joyful. And now, here's my conversation with Jeroen Vandermost. Okay, Jeroen, sir, how are you?
Yeah, I'm doing great. Nice to be here. Absolutely. Looking forward to our conversation.
I'm so excited, Jeroen, about this. Look, I got to see a few months ago some of your work on through LinkedIn and other forums, and I was then just amazed with how you are taking uh, different types of innovation and technologies and uh, fusing them and combining them with uh, creative concepts and creating, an output that is so bigger than its parts. And so that just, amazes me. And I think it would be awesome to talk about your story, your method, and whatnot. So I think perhaps a good place to start is, about you and your story and how what you're doing. I would almost call it a movement. Art have movements in different eras. So this whole, way of taking AI and other technologies and combining them and then adding all kind of creativity. So to me, it is kind of a new era. And I'm just speaking, I'm not an art expert by any stretch. I'm just a, somebody, who has appreciation for art. And with that, Jeroen, sir, over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, great to hear. Yeah, and AI is definitely changing the creative scene at the moment and will increasingly do so, I guess. So yeah, my art is working with artificial intelligence, and I basically started doing it, or at least working with algorithms. Basically, what before we, yeah, eventually in 2013, 14, got these AI systems, deep learning based systems that we still today kind of call artificial intelligence. I started working with the algorithms before that, basically around 2008, 2009, just fascinated by the technology back then, also because I was doing something rather different at that point. That I was still working in field of data science and market research. And a lot of the stuff that we were doing back then was actually doing all these kinds of yeah, that time pretty innovative research projects. For example, I worked a lot with these technologies, eye tracking back then. So really monitor how people look at well, advertisements, but also artistic imagery and what could keep their attention and what didn't, etc. But I also worked a lot with technologies, and I wrote my own algorithms for that to actually yeah, mine or analyze all sorts of social media content, for example, Twitter messages, to do research into how, well, for example, yeah, people were talking online about all sorts of societal issues. And then monitor yeah, what was being said on Twitter, etc. Monitor the sentiment to see yeah, what was being talked about, but also what opinions were within yeah, the market, for example, of the Netherlands, where I was working. So working in Amsterdam. But at some point, I got kind of, well, I was kind of getting bored out with these research projects, just doing this dry research with the algorithms. But I was getting towards the idea at that point that I would like to do something more creative using these same types of algorithms. So these algorithms that I use to scrape, gather all those Twitter messages. And sometimes already I use them to actually yeah, visualize online discussions with these algorithms. So at some point I got the idea that it would be cool if you would be on Twitter, for example, if you would be a heavy Twitter user, that would be cool if I could some way use your Twitter messages to actually create some kind of art out of it. Because when I was reading someone's timeline on Twitter at some point back in 2009, I was really thinking from, hey, this is pretty nice to read back, because it really tells you a lot about what a person yeah, has been doing recently, or what his or her feelings were about all sorts of stuff, what was keeping someone busy. And I thought that would be cool if I could, for example, create a portrait of a Twitter user based on their Twitter profile picture, but then create it into some large image that could be printed and you could put on a wall. And from a distance, it would be your portrait, so your face, your social profile picture. But from up close, it would be built up out of all your Twitter messages. So you could read back your Twitter messages, and at the same time, it would be a portrait. So it would be something like a digital new sort of portrait, a representation of what a people or person is in the digital realm. So I built a little website around that concept where people could log in with the Twitter accounts and then yeah, already see this kind of crude version of their Twitter portrait. And they could actually order that and get the thing printed. And well, it was going pretty well. And at some point, it really got into yeah, the media in the Netherlands. So a Dutch newspaper wrote about it, and from that it jumped into onto some yeah, into the UK. So where it was published on some more yeah, websites about trend watching, and then it really exploded in publicity for that project. And really, these Twitter paintings, as they were called back then, really yeah, reached every end of the world. So people in yeah, newspapers in Japan to Argentina to Australia were writing about it and tweeting about it. So it was pretty insane. But it got more interesting even when at some point I got this message, this email
Yeah.
from someone in New Zealand. And she had seen my work in these Twitter paintings. She had seen them online, and she asked me because they just had an earthquake back there in I think it was 2010. It must have been. And one of the major cities in New Zealand, Christchurch, was actually the center of the city was destroyed by this earthquake. And what she asked me to do was, or she asked me to, if I could create some kind of artwork to inspire the rebuilding of the city, because they were organizing this TEDx conference back then to present all sorts of ideas about the rebuilding and restructuring of the city. And she asked me if I could use Twitter messages to actually create some sort of artwork, because Twitter is a pretty important medium there to for communication around these earthquakes, to let people know you're okay, but to also to put all sorts of news on it. And they have this specific hashtag for it, NQNZ, of EQNZ earthquake New Zealand. And so what I did was actually create a system with which I collected thousands of these Twitter messages with that specific hashtag about the earthquake. And I created this visual with it, which actually inspired on Van Gogh's famous painting Starry Night. And it actually depicts Van Gogh's Starry Night, but then actually above the city of Christchurch. And I created this digital image with it, sent it to New Zealand, and they printed it there. And it was actually exhibited for some time in the church, one of the main churches in the city center of Christchurch. But then I think it was like half a year later, it was actually added to the collection of the National Historic Museum of New Zealand, Te Papa it's called. And for me, it was really, I really got this learning. For me was that because it was actually some idea I had, which I thought was cool, these Twitter paintings, and I built a site around it. But then, like 1 year later, it was actually one of these artworks was added to the collection of the National Historic Museum in New Zealand, and actually inspiring people there. And that really taught me that, even as an individual, just using these newer technologies like algorithms, social media, and combine it with human creativity, it can be a really powerful medium to get inspiration, to inspire people literally at the other side of the world. And that for me was really the start of a career path into that of an artist, in creating increasingly more and spending more time on creating these artworks in which you use newer technologies and combine them with creativity in some way to actually inspire and teach or touch people with these artworks.
No, this is like, so amazing, Jeroen, that how your work can touch the lives of so many people in a positive way and impact their lives. It is just such an amazing story. If we were to, just go back in time a little bit, maybe you want to tell people about you and your story, and how you, sir, came to be. And I'm sure things and people and events influenced you on your journey.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Well, I was born in the Netherlands, in a small place, a pretty small place, a small place in comparison to American standards. But in the Netherlands, close to Amsterdam, Hoorn, and I lived there for a couple of years. And then we moved. Me and my family moved to the Middle East. So we lived for a while in Oman, actually, Muscat, the capital there, and then moved back somewhere at the age of 10 or 11 back to the Netherlands. And there I lived or went to my to school, etc. And lived for a while in places like it's a pretty small island, which actually is part of the Netherlands. It's called Curaçao. It's close to South America, and but also lived for a short while in the UK. Worked there for a while, Yeah, basically what you can say is that I've always been interested in art, of course, always been active also in creating all sorts of yeah, artistic materials, so doing paintings or drawings, but also always had this really fascination for technical innovations. So that's always been keeping me busy. And then at some point, career-wise, I got more into into the business field. But then, so for example, in these market research projects, etc. But in my vision, at some point, you really also start to learn really what your what your where your passion is, or at least you have this slight feeling where it is. You have to what your real passion is, and my do this also really brings you back to these kind of fascinations that you already had as a kid. And for me, that was creation, there was investigation, there was experimentation with newer technologies, and someone that's really got together again for me in this in this creation of these art projects using artificial intelligence. So that's kind of funny in some way that it's really I think that for the grown up, their passion is always often connected to already that these signs of a sort of specific passion that you had as a kid. And that kind of that's basically more or less the journey that brought me where I am now.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. When I, look at your work, I see, you know, passion for technology. I see somebody who understands algorithms and mathematics, somebody who has studied art. I also see somebody who can work with many different technologies and components and pieces together and bring them in some amazing way. I'm so interested in knowing what is your mental process like? How do you go about conceiving it, thinking it in your head, and then working it out? You have a studio, you have a lab. What is your mental process, and how does it all come about? I'm a software person, so I know that, and I'm a trained mathematician. uh, so ideas come slowly and non-linearly. So, you're walking and something comes, and I have become disciplined now to write it down, and then you iterate and whatnot. So I know that creativity is a non-linear process. So interested in knowing what is your process.
Yeah, I agree very much. It's definitely a non-linear process, and it's also kind of interesting that well, at one hand, creativity, new ideas sometimes come like from out of nothing, but on the other hand, it's also really in my experiments, at least for me, it's also really creativity is also really about discipline and hard work. So it's really if you really have to bring something new, have to bring something new creative, then you really have to just sit down and spend your hours on it, spend your hours of thinking on it to really get to something eventually. And for me, that's just by doing, by doing the sweat and work, at some point it will always deliver something. And for me, that these new ideas were really at the beginning of my career. So when I started working with those algorithms and artificial intelligence, the ideas were really about coming forward out of a technical fascination. So really about all the new possibilities that were what you could do with artificial intelligence. So of course algorithms, but artificial intelligence definitely to a next level enable you to create all these new sorts of imagery or new sorts of sounds or new sorts of text, for example. Basically, most of the time based on the principle that the AI system analyzes thousands of pictures, for example, and then from that knowledge that the system built up, you can create new sorts of images. So, for example, I analyze thousands of cats with pictures of a cat with AI system, and then the system learns what a cat is visually, shape, form, texture, colors, etc., more or less. And based on that knowledge, it can create something new that to us looks again like a cat. But over the years, what's driving my creativity became more and more something that is not only to do with the technical aspect, because that still has definitely my fascination. So it was at the beginning, it was just about trying, experimenting, all sorts of cool stuff that you could do with technology. And for example, the Twitter paintings just got out of was basically started more or less like that. Can I create a portrait of someone built out of the Twitter messages? But at some point, I started to realize that that's not just the most it's not the most interesting aspect about working with technology, because to me, at least, the more interesting aspects of working with artificial intelligence in that way, but also yeah, working with algorithms in that way, is that it is also touching all sorts of philosophical aspects. So, for example, if you create new artistic imagery using artificial intelligence, if these systems are capable of creating convincing new art images, and they can create images like that, for example, by analyzing all sorts of abstract paintings, then an AI system can really create something, a new image of an abstract painting that's pretty convincing to people, or at least that a lot of people will find inspiring. And if a system like that can do something like that, if a system can be creative to some extent, then this really makes you wonder how unique are we as humans? How unique as humans are we? And are we? Could you call these systems really creative, or are we really creative, or are we sort of like machines? So in that sense, the AI, what you create with AI, these projects are really also a sort of mirror, or they pose questions about what it is to be human. And these were kind of the ideas that really, like mid-career wise, like 6, 7 years ago, really started to, well, I was getting convinced that that was, these aspects were what was keeping me really interested into the technology. And one step further, this evolved into actually the realization that AI in itself is a sort of metaphor, of course, for technology in a broader sense, but is also in projects that I do. These are experimentations or explorations about how we can use technology in another way. So that's really fundamental for me, that you could use, or at least experiment with these art projects, to use technology in a different way than we're used to. So for example, you could maybe say that we as humans today are really used to using technology, well, for example, for all sorts of productivity increases, or to strive for ROIs, higher ROIs, or to create better products. But you could also wonder if it wouldn't be interesting to start using technology, artificial intelligence, to create, for example, deeper connections between people, but also between, for example, humans on the one hand, and nature on the other hand. So in that sense, technology would become something less human centric. It would be something that would be more about, yeah, this bridging of these boundaries between, yeah, that we perceive these illusionary boundaries between us and other people, or between us and and nature, for example. And these are the more philosophical, deeper themes that are behind artificial intelligence. And there, around these aspects, these topics, that's really what's keeping me interested in the technology, but also that's really what's driving my creativity. So my creativity, or my ideas for new projects, come really are often forward from all sorts of well, media that I follow, for example, or social media accounts that I follow, about all sorts of course, again, technical innovation, but also about philosophy, or all sorts of new views on society, new views on the human. It could be things from quantum mechanics, or from neuroscience, etc., etc. And these are really, there's so much happening at the moment that's just an endless source of inspiration for me to work around, and to really get to projects. And what I also do is, of course, work a lot for organizations. So in that sense, there the topics or the projects really come forward out of this cooperation often between the organization and me, but it's always around these certain topics, these explorations of new futures with these new forms, these deeper connections between us and our surroundings.
No, that is awesome. What do you, Jeroen, see as the future of artificial intelligence or other technologies? Where do you see uh, these technologies going in your work? The human nature and technology interacting, that message comes across loud and clear. And what do you see as the future of that fusion, nature, people, technology coming together? In many of your sort of work examples that I have seen, I also see not just artificial intelligence at play, but I see the possibility of consciousness and human consciousness and understanding what it is, and then maybe figuring out deeper levels of consciousness beyond intelligence. So maybe tell us a little bit about, as you see, you know, all this interplay between nature, technology, us as people, and this sort of, you know, fusion of consciousness and intelligence, and what is possible. Meaning, it, I think we would agree that this movement is still in its early days, and human angle. I'm really also drawn to this point that you made, that sometimes we as people, we are guilty of, you know, making everything too human centered. You know, we put ourselves as the center of gravity for everything. And sometimes we need to appreciate that it is so much bigger than us, and we are not at any center of gravity and that kind of thing. So now would love to, you know, hear from you on all these topics.
Yeah, super. Yeah, I agree very very much with a lot that you've said. Indeed, I think there's when you're talking about the future of AI, it's of course. I mean, there will be a lot of developments that are quite clear that will be coming towards us, like just the systems getting much faster, or more being able to create bigger, more impressive imagery. I'm pretty convinced, or for sure, that will happen. Other developments that you will see coming up with artificial intelligence are, of course, things like the interaction or the combination of AI with all sorts of forms of, for example, AR, augmented reality, etc. So these fusions of AI created content with the real world. But the most interesting, at least to me, development in AI is a more fundamental one that you're indeed described a while ago, and this is the realization, or at least the development or the possibility that we might be able to use artificial intelligence to indeed get closer to these to our surroundings. For example, nature. For example, other humans could also be the case. And maybe it's interesting indeed to show some of the projects that I did around this topic. If you're talking about these deeper relationships between humans, for example, on the one hand, and nature on the other hand, maybe let's focus on that aspect for this moment. So between humans and nature, in my view, or in my work, I explore the possibility that you use artificial intelligence to deepen these relationships. So between humans on the one hand and the natural world on the other side, on the other hand. And what you could see happening there is that, for example, artificial intelligence could be used, for example, to deepen the understanding between humans and nature. And what we did or experimented around that idea was a project that I did with an acquaintance of mine, Peter van der Putten. He's associated with Leiden University in the Netherlands. And last summer, we started working on a project in which we wanted to explore the deepening of the relationship between humans and nature. And what we came up with was a project in which we used artificial intelligence to actually give nature the capacity to become a player in the societal debate around climate change. So what we used was AI to create letters or build a system to create letters on behalf of nature, in which nature warned and complained or asked for help about the climate crisis. And these letters were actually sent out to world leaders. The project is called Letters from Nature. So there were actually letters to presidents sent out, created by AI on behalf of nature. So that's letters from nature.
This, this is Jeroen so powerful where, you know, AI in a creative way to give a voice to parts of our ecosystem uh, to be able to speak on their behalf as if they are conscious and experiencing and whatnot. The thing that I like most about consciousness, Jeroen, is that we as people, when we come across another entity, another being, another system that seem to have consciousness like properties, we then, in our minds at least, afford them some rights. We take them seriously. So this is wonderful in that sense that uh, giving a voice to everyone to speak on their behalf as if they are they have human-like consciousness. Maybe those entities, thinking about panpsychism, maybe they have their own internal private lives and their own inner subjective experiences different from ours. But this way, we are making communication happen between these different nodes of the same ecosystem that are connected. So I'm just amazed by it. But this is awesome, Jeroen.
Great to hear. Yeah, I recognize a lot of in what you say. It's of course it's the main topic of this giving a voice to these natural forces or natural entities. Of course, an idea which been yeah, really written a lot about in both, of course, philosophical literature, but also in all sorts of yeah, ancient myths and indigenous traditions. We're always spoken and written about yeah, these yeah, natural entities outside of the human that you could imagine to have, for example, a mountain that would have some sort of consciousness. And it's really become one of my favorite projects also, yeah, over the last year, because it's really been able to really, yeah, gain this very large reach, really inspire people all over the world, and really get a discussion going on, well, sometimes also of whether this is the right way to approach this, or but also about the use of artificial intelligence. Can we really use artificial intelligence in another way? Because if we could use this in another way, maybe as a sort of spokesperson or sort of intermediary between humans and nature, this would of course have these huge societal effects and changes in the power structures that yeah, that drive our societies. So it's an exploration of how you might envision that to happen at some point. And this is a project that's been able to reach, well, it will be in a Dutch museum show in October, and also in one in Germany later on this year, and starting in December. So that's really amazing to see that, yeah, that's it's being growing into this vehicle to really drive this yeah, idea and inspiration about yeah, the newer uses of artificial intelligence, but also about this possibility yeah, to use technology in another way, and to definitely also increase understanding between humans and nature, and that way create more a mutual empathy. That's also what it's about. So
If it's
yeah, I'm very
okay,
happy.
Jeroen, maybe let's take a look at a few more of your projects while we are at it.
Yeah,
Uh,
sure.
yeah.
So you could imagine if you were thinking, or if you're thinking about this deepening of these relationships, again between humans on the one hand and nature on the other hand. And this project, for me, was kind of typical of sort of first step in that process, in which you would, because it's increasing understanding, starting with understanding and mutual empathy between humans and nature. Yeah, getting this bigger, deeper mutual understanding. But the next step that you could imagine could be something that is more about one step further about co-creation, for example. So about nature on the one hand and humans on the other hand, creating something new together. And based on that idea, that might be a sort of newer extra step again in this deepening relationship, I started the project, the shard transformation. And the shard transformation is a project that is also in a movie again, and I can show it to you now. This art project started with human destruction, like our world faces every day. I then took pictures of thousands of forest flowers to train an AI system on the flower shapes, so the AI could reconstruct the shards in natural shapes. The system tells me how to rebuild the mirrors. Technology often drives humans and nature apart. But doesn't our fractured world need a new perspective? Couldn't we design technology that lets humans and nature work together? And wouldn't true change need a shared transformation?
Wow.
So that's the shard transformation. It's basically yeah, it evolved this project around this idea of that I wanted to get into some artistic form, some creation of some artwork that at one hand would be based on some sort of human input, in this case human destruction, but at the other hand would be based on some sort of natural creation, in this case the flower forms, which through AI would be yeah, mixed and kind of bred into this new co-creation form. So this basically started this project of me destructing all those mirrors actually in the Amsterdam forest, quite close to here, and then collecting and digitalizing all these shards. And then I built this AI system or AI model. I trained an AI model based on thousands of flower pictures, and then it starts to learn what the shapes of the flowers are, and eventually is capable of creating flower forms basically on its own, and then rearrange the mirror shards into all these new forms. And that way we have sort of created some sort of crossbreed or some sort of co-creation that is yeah, based on natural but also human, also input by artificial intelligence. So this is again an example of an exploration of how you could use yeah, technology, artificial intelligence in another way than a purely human-centric way.
It's awesome. You know, it comes across very, very strongly.
So it's yeah, cool to hear. So that's really, of course, it could be if you think about this deepening relationships that would start or started with a deeper understanding in the Letters from Nature project, but also in this co-creation form of the shard transformation. You could also imagine that there would be some sort of newer forms eventually that would again get into some kind of deeper way of actually yeah, really yeah, blending almost into what yeah, nature is, because in reality we're of course not separated from nature, we're just all part of the same system, of course. So the whole basic idea of these boundaries between ourselves and our surroundings, that's of course an illusion. And for me, it's interesting to use technology to actually try to bridge those boundaries. And what I'm working on at the moment, I can't show actually that project, but it's really about getting deeper into this new state of a sort of transcendental state in which you actually could feel this connection or blend over into nature through artistic forms yeah, created again, artistic projects, artworks created with artificial intelligence. And maybe it's cool to show one other project that's more about, because we've really focused on nature now. So this boundary between humans on the one hand and nature on the one hand, a very important one, of course, but it's also in relation to, again, for example, the climate crisis. It is, in my view, of course, Letters from Nature, such a project as that's really about yeah, new ideas about how to deal with climate crisis, etc. But another example or another something that would be important in my view to deal or get into some sort of new societal forms would be really about bringing back ideas from the past into the now. So that you would use artificial intelligence to create systems that can actually bring back ancient wisdoms into the now and actually, yeah, bring new sorts of yeah, inspiration and ideas there based on those more traditional ways of life, for example, which you could imagine to be, for example, more parts of tribal ideas, tribal philosophy or ancient philosophy that would be more about being in a deeper state or a better balance with living together with nature. But in the project that I'd like to show you now, it's a project that I did for Radboud University, the Netherlands, and it's a project in which we used artificial intelligence to actually create a system that would create new inspirational quotes, new motivational quotes based on the work of Maria Montessori. So Montessori, of course, founder of the Montessori education system, which who wrote her most important works, more or less in the first half of the 20th century. And what I really found interesting about her work is that, it's of course it's a philosophy, or it's a sort of vision on how education should work, and it would be really based on own initiative of the child and the freedom of the child in choosing the moments to learn, for example. But it's also really, her work is also really about values. So it's really about values like freedom, truth, but also human connection, but also about natural connection. So stuff she wrote about a lot was also this connection, these deeper connections, or feeling part of the world of nature, of feeling connection with nature. And in this project, the Shard transformation, it's actually GPT-3 based. Like nature, Let's from Nature was also GPT-3 based. So it's based on GPT-3, but then combined with a whole series of like custom developed what you might call shells around the system, which actually enabled the system to so it's an installation. You see it at the top here. It's presented on this screen of it's something like 4 meters wide, 3 meters high. It's the top of a big stairs in a new building of Radboud University called the Montessori building, to honor Montessori. It was built like 1 year ago. And in this artwork, the system is continuously creating new sorts of inspirational content. So new motivational quotes about all sorts of topics that it finds on the website of the university, on in the research news section of the university. So if the research section shows reports about, new research that has been done into, for example, black holes, but it could also be the economy, it could be education, of course. System is gathering all the topics from there, and then creating new inspirational quotes around or based as reflections on those topics. So it can say things like, for example, the great secret of education is to direct the child's capacity for wonder. These are quotations or new lines of text. The system also Googles, so it tries to find out if it's really new what it's creating, and only if it's new, then it's placed on the screen. But it's also saying stuff like, for example, let me find one which is more about, I think this is a pretty interesting one, because it's saying here, the computer is not a machine to think for us. It is a tool that helps us to think. So that's pretty interesting, because of course an AI system that's reflecting on its own state of, but it's a really important message in my view, that it's not something, that AI is not something that will take over, or that we have to take care of, that it's not taking over our thinking, but it's helping us to think. But it's in that sense reflecting on all sorts of things, like from education to stuff that's, for example, this one, the real creative act is not the one that produces something new, but the one that alters something in our perception of reality. And that's really, in my view, that's just really showing the quality of what AI systems at this moment, like GPT-3, are able to do. Because it's of course based on this huge volume of textual data that it's based on, and it's capable to do this. But more fundamental to me is that why this is interesting is because we can use artificial intelligence technology to actually sort of bridge the boundary between the now and the past. So actually bring the ideas from someone, the values from someone, which are really in this work of Montessori, for example, and bring that into now and actually create something new that again is able to inspire, in this case, students and researchers at the university. So that's really interesting project that's going to be exhibited, for example, at it's a pretty big design event in the Netherlands in October, Dutch Design Week. It's going to be shown there to an audience outside of the university for the first time.
This is so powerful, Jeroen. So a few questions come to my mind. One, on your idea of bringing ancient wisdom uh, and somehow uh, through an interface like this, making it available to people today, uh, how would you go about uh, doing something like that? Like, what would be a good way to build that kind of a system, or at least a way to think about? I'm really drawn to that idea of how do we do that. Also, I'm interested. You mentioned GPT-3. I'm also interested in knowing what is your experience like with uh, GPT-3 and what kind of creative things you have been able to do with it.
Yeah, it's actually I got started working with GPT-3 back in so last summer, pretty soon after it was launched. I think it was in July 2020. But then started working with it. And Letters from Nature was one of the first projects that I did with it together with Peter van den Putten. And that's at that point that was not really based on the API yet. But then a little while later, I really started working on the API. So this project really just continuously this last artwork that I showed you for Radboud University. That's actually a system that's actually just full-time interacting with GPT-3's API. And it's GPT-3 was really I think it's still very interesting. It really amazed me, of course, at the time that it really got launched last summer, because it was really a big step forward again in the capability and the capacity of AI systems to generate new sorts of text. So I worked a lot with, in earlier projects, I worked with GPT-2, but GPT-3 is, of course, just again, a very big step forward. But that's interesting, very interesting side experiment with this system, which I worked on with, she's called Gabrielle Ras. She's a PhD candidate from Radboud University, from the AI department there. And she created this really interesting aspect of the artwork as well, which came forward out of the what we saw happening was that the system was actually it showed signs of gender bias, in the sense that it was when it was talking about teachers, for example, or children, and it would also always be referring to them in the pronouns as he. And that's, of course, to our current norms, values, that's not really something that you would like to have. And as I read quite a lot about, or quite some of the work of Maria Montessori, I had the impression that she actually did it herself when in her first publications, and that might be the source of why that's happening, but of course that's not for sure. But what we decided to do was actually create a methodology to actually get rid of those pronouns. So it's the whole output of the system is now completely gender neutral, in the sense that it's never using he or she anymore, but it's also always using they when it's referring to a person. So that's, of course, again, that's just the interesting aspect for me of these projects, especially when there are cooperations with organizations, is that you could really see all these kind of little side experiments happening there within the artwork. And it's really, I find that really fascinating how all these side experiments pop up, like this gender neutral methodology to make these texts of an AI system actually gender neutral. So yeah, quite enthusiastic about GPT-3, absolutely. And then, but it does require you to build quite a system around it to eventually really get you into something that you could show to the public. And of course, very interested what's happening at other places as well around this generation of new textual technologies. And yeah, I'm convinced that again, yeah, within a couple of years, you will probably see stuff that's really gonna amaze you. So some of the most interesting aspects of this, of course, also based on or by OpenAI. It's, for example, the CLIP methodology. So the CLIP system, which is in a sense the generation of artistic or visual imagery based on textual descriptions. So there's also, I saw, I think it was this week or last week, an open source variant of that already. It's kind of crude still, very crude, you could call it. So you can give in a description, like, for example, a dog smoking a cigar, and then you would actually see something like a dog smoking a cigar. And that's really, that's of course, it's kind of silly, that example, but it is fun. But it's of course something that's exemplary or some kind of first step into this huge new field of possibilities. That's of course, yeah, that you might see happening in the coming years. That if we could actually create great images like that from scratch based on visual imagery, or sorry, based on textual descriptions, that's of course a major game changer again in how you can create visual content, but also offers all sorts of possibilities again, are very fundamental in some sort of, you know, it makes possible all sorts of real-time forms of visual stuff, movies, maybe imagery, just based on textual description. That's really something that's going to have really big implications if that's really going to happen. And the chances are quite high, I guess, that it's going to happen at some point.
No. So one thing, Jeroen, that I want to now explore a little bit in the context of uh, business and technology and education. If we look at uh, how businesses are organized today, so we have a lot of data these days. And then you have, business users or business analysts, and their job is to analyze that data and make good quality, high quality decisions. We all, at some level, benefit from or pay the price of either good decisions or poor decisions that are being made every day on planet Earth by, I'm just lovingly calling these colleagues as business analysts. I am one such person myself. And the challenge, Jeroen, there is, of course, there is a lot of data. And of course, humans, we are a creative bunch when we are put in the right context. But these tools that we have to analyze data and visualize data today, they are very basic, very fundamental. They don't inspire the creative parts of our brain. Their visual capabilities are very limited. As a result, our ability to see what that data really is telling us, that ability to see is very compromised. What do you, so, and that is, look, think about your own, we are having this conversation here today. The business of planet Earth is run by big companies or small companies, but it is run by businesses. And businesses are a collection of people and data and systems and processes. And they are making decisions, whether businesses or government bodies, or there are decisions being made, some small decisions, some big decisions. But these decisions have far-reaching consequences. Their consequences are not immediately visible, but sooner or later, either we benefit from some good decisions made, or in many cases, we pay the price as humanity of poor decisions made. So when people are making those decisions, those micro decisions, they don't have the right kind of tools. What is your vision, Jeroen, of how to even build data visualization or other AI tools that within a business can equip business analysts like me to say, okay, now you can see more, you can see deeper, you can see better, and you can use the neocortex and all this, wonderful brain circuitry that I have to examine the consequences of different choices or decisions that I'm about to make so that I can make the right decision.
Yeah, that's a very interesting point that you're making. It's also a difficult question, but I recognize a lot in your story. It's also what you're describing is also a little bit what got me out of market research data science at some point, because although I wouldn't have been able to explain it like that at that point, but it's really the problem with data analysis data at the moment is, of course, yeah, like it's very crude, like you describe it, and also in the sense that it's not able to. I mean, you're gonna with I mean, for example, all the tweaking of all sorts of campaigns based on ROI, data analysis, etc. We of course will probably all know that it can help you realize quite some big steps, but it won't deliver you some kind of new inspiring strategy or product or whatever. That's really, I know that's a simplification if I put it like that, but in some way that was what really got me out of data science at some point, because I missed. It's interesting, but it's not something that will really deliver you a groundbreaking, new, inspiring something that will really get your energy going. And that's really, I think there's a couple of ideas I have around that. And for the first, what you could first imagine is also again artificial intelligence systems playing a role there, in the sense that, for example, AI systems are to some extent, although their creativity is still, I would call it still quite limited at this point, they are capable of creating surprising stuff out of data, which I encounter quite often in my work. That I start projects, for example, based on all sorts of images, and let the AI systems analyze it, create new imagery, and then the output sometimes really surprises me. I'm seeing something that's really not something that I had realized at first or had the goal of creating, but it's creating something that's really new and maybe even has value. And in that sense, you could really call it this new, has value, and it's different from what was there. So it's really sort of, you could call it creative. There's all sorts of applications there that you could also really see happening or being useful in a business context. So, for example, you could again imagine, for example, you could do all sorts of data analysis based on the products that you're selling as a company, and see, hey, this is selling better, this is selling less, and let's sell more of the thing that's selling better. But you could also, for example, use an AI system to generate all sorts of new product ideas. That's a very concrete one that I got this idea from an acquaintance of mine, Jarno Duursma, he's called, trend watcher in the Netherlands, and he's often given this example, which is a rather useful example, I think, of using artificial intelligence. So, for example, this could be again be GPT-3 based. For example, you could use GPT-3, an AI system, to analyze all sorts of all the products based on the websites in the market that companies are selling, and then from all those textual data and other data it can find, actually create all sorts of new product forms or new sorts of products. And if you would generate quite a bunch of them and spend a couple of hours reading them, then you probably will be quite surprised about some of the quality of the output that you will be seeing there, that will actually be sometimes some pretty amazing ideas in there. Like I encountered myself in my artworks, for example, in the Spirit Machine artwork based on Montessori, that of course not all the quotes or the quotations are of very high quality, but at some point it's really some of these lines, some of these text that it's generating are really something that you could that really inspired me to think about stuff in another way. And that's already where you can see new forms of uses of artificial intelligence kind of happening on data, and in that sense delivering surprising output. But this, of course, this still is a little bit in the field of it's still quite it's a next step, but it's a small next step, I would call it. And a bigger step is, of course, possible when you would have a little bit more advanced AI systems that are actually capable of getting to something that is more a new next step in the inspirational quality of what it's creating. So, for example, and this really starts to touch on what art, for example, really is. I mean, art is really what you call art is really inspiring and motivating, or just giving you this sense of beauty, because it's also has this sort of complexity or this characteristic that it has something that is sublime, that you can't comprehend, that you can't get to it what it is. So it has something that is bigger, is outside of your comprehension. And some things that AI systems are doing, or maybe will be doing, will be generating stuff, new ideas based on data that will actually be really surprising and really be beyond our own comprehension. And that's, I think, there are the new sort of systems that will really get data analysis into some sort of new level. And this could again be in some kind of really practical form, again referring back to the Spirit Machine artwork, where you would have these technologies, these intelligent systems that are actually sort of partners, communication entities, digital humans maybe, inside organizations, and could actually be some kind of interacting machines or technologies that actually give new ideas about businesses and about data. So that's maybe one way to think about these new steps. Another step would be to actually have, of course, better data, in the sense that you would
Yeah.
have more data,
Yeah.
that you would have better censoring systems, etc., etc. And where you could imagine that again is, for example, if you would have far more data about the climate, for example, that would really again bring these systems to a new level of being able AI system to tell us stuff about the climate, or to deliver us new ideas about how we could do stuff that would benefit the climate in a positive way. But there's also a pitfall there, I guess. But because the pitfall is also that we're thinking about data and about the limitations of data, that we're always trying to solve these limitations by bringing in better machines and more data, for example. And I think at some point that's also a pitfall and an illusion, that you could
Yeah.
always solve the limited capacity of data with more data or more technology. And what I think it's also very important that, and it's again brings me more to this bridging of the boundaries maybe between you. It's always very important to keep also human intuition and human empathy, human feelings really in the loop. So really the combination of human intuition, human creativity with technology, with data and artificial intelligence, that's really also, that's very important in my view, that AI will serve as this enabler again of increased forms of human creativity to actually benefit again, not just us humans, but the surroundings. That's what surrounds us, other humans, and the natural world.
No, no, absolutely. What advice, Jeroen, you would have for uh, businesses, practical advice today to train their people uh, to boost their creativity skills? What type of, going back to diversity in all forms, what type of uh, people or skills or talents businesses should be thinking about mixing and matching uh, with business analysts? So just your take on, since you have seen it all, your advice on how to train people, retool people, how to have different types of, colleagues with different gifts and skills coming together to achieve a certain outcome. Because today tools are limited, we are only incrementally getting better from one day to the next. So would love to hear what would be your advice for uh, someone who wants to take their team to next level by doing different things, trying different things, maybe bringing other type of colleagues to the mix, learning some new skills. So any of your ideas, I'm very interested in hearing on that topic.
Yeah, that's a very good question again. Yeah, it's really about, I think this combination indeed of, for example, data analysis skills with other skills is really important. And creativity is really one of those, but you could really imagine, yeah, several topics which are really important nowadays to combine with programming skills, data analysis skills, etc. Of course, it's something like ethics, of course. That's something that's really, yeah, it's just a must at this moment, that you have something, at least some kind of knowledge or experience with, or even reading something that's fundamental about, or high quality about ethics, that you have some kind of ideas about that. But also, what's really beneficial is to have some sort of, yeah, knowledge or comprehension of philosophy to some extent, so that you have some ideas about philosophy, the main philosophical ideas that really, yeah, are behind our society today, and that our society today is an example, or at least it's an example, or it's at least a form that is not there because it just has to be like that. There are ideas behind our society today, and these ideas can change, and we can change them to something else or to something better. And that's really what really got me on that track, is really to philosophy, definitely. So ethics, philosophy, but also just what to some extent, without really gets people out of just more traditional ways of doing analysis. Really, it is also experimenting with newer technologies. So the really fun and newer technologies, so playing around with GPT-3, for example, can really bring people to some extent to all sorts of new ideas on that, to do all sorts of new stuff. So that's really a practical one that is fun for people who will work. And finally, it's also very good, of course, to do stuff with art. So learn stuff about art and go see art and go see and learn about the ideas behind that. So maybe that helps people to some extent to get to better teams.
Who are, some of your favorite philosophers, and what type of books you read, or people and ideas that have inspired you as of late? Any names or books that you would like to mention?
That's yeah, again, a difficult one, but it really evolves often around my work, around the art projects I do, because they really come forward often out of these philosophical ideas. So I really read quite some pieces of Montessori's work, and it really surprised me, because I had never had read something from her. But it really surprised me that it had this and this is of course my own naivety, but it's really surprised me that it had this philosophical depth as well. And this really was this vision about values, about education, but also in a broader sense yeah, of life. But one of the other projects I did, for example, in 2020 for Society Capgemini, I think they're called in English, was a project that evolved around the works of Nietzsche. So Nietzsche has this really, and I don't know, that really reading the works of Nietzsche is often quite dry material. I read one of them, but there's a lot of content that's really interesting around the work of Nietzsche. And what I did there was in that project was actually GPT-2 based at that point. Might be 2 years ago already, but it was a GPT-2 based project at that point, and I used the works an analysis by AI. GPT-2 based on the works of Nietzsche to recreate the mission statement of the company Society or Society in more English pronunciation. And it was this kind of, because really Nietzsche's work is really about this personal transformation and the phases that you go through in your life. And it's really got, you could really see that back also in this mission statement that it created, of all these sorts of, yeah, a little bit fake, but also really this little bit biblical ideas about transformation of what a company should do and what technology should be about, etc. So maybe there's some inspiration in there for people to read or view something online.
I want to, as we bring our conversation to closure, I want to ask you a couple just thought questions or experiments. So we, as people, suddenly we share our intelligence and consciousness, and we are able to communicate with each other. But as you made the point earlier, we are not able to communicate with nature or even appreciate nature and also other fellow living creatures on Earth. It looks like that, everybody is smart in their own rights, whether I'm an ant in an ant colony, or I'm a bird, or I'm a octopus, or whosoever I happen to be. You pick and choose, or maybe I'm a simple organism. So for evolved animals, or sea creatures, what would be a good way if we were to communicate with them through mirrors and technology? And if we were to feel like, what does it feel like to be an ant and talk to an ant, or an octopus, or a crow? How would you, Jeroen, think about that modern technology and art and the interface, you know between, that can go cross species, where we can learn from other forms of intelligence that is very different from our own intelligence, but it is there. We today, just pure out of ignorance and sometimes misplaced politics, we don't afford them any rights. We don't really care about them. But I think there's a lot to learn from them. We just don't know how.
Yeah, that's probably the most difficult question. This one, it's of course a very interesting question because yeah, that's one of my fascinations, and definitely this connection with other consciousness, with the natural world is of course the main focus of my work, and also broader than my work. It's really something that increasingly is being experimented with in the art world today. Of course, again, because of these developments, of course, also with the climate crisis. But it's, of course, a very difficult question. And there are baby steps that are actually being done in real research, big research projects, and actually, again, using artificial intelligence to some extent generate or create, learn more of the language of animals. So which could be, I mean, they're doing it with birds, but also with, for for example, I think with sea mammals. So, of course, these are technologies that to some extent can create or extract all sorts of patterns from the sound, yeah, basically from sound data, and probably find some kind of correlation between what it's seeing, what's doing, etc. And that way, learn more of what animals could be experiencing. But this whole idea, of course, of really feeling or experiencing what it's like to be an ant or to be a bird, could of course wonder if that ever will be possible fully, because it's all, even if you think about humans in relation to other humans, even there it's of course, you could wonder if it's possible at all to really, can you really feel, experience what it's like to be another. Maybe that's eventually an impossibility in the end at all, but it's something that's really, in my view, or at least in my work, I really try to explore to really get or make progress there to some extent, to really make, for example, people realize more about the feelings of nature, for example, like with the project Letters from Nature. So AI is the sort of interface again of yeah, making all sorts of translations of what nature could be feeling or doing based on, for example, natural data. But you could also think of all sorts of other forms, visual forms, in which you could actually see or feel the perspective of the ant through virtual reality, etc. But it's this really, it's an amazingly interesting topic, of course, how we can eventually transcend or really be part, or increasingly can become part of yeah, that bigger consciousness that you might yeah, see us all being part of. So it's yeah, it's a very interesting question, but I unfortunately don't have the very concrete practical solutions for it. But I would like to thank you very much for the interesting conversation. Really enjoyed it. Really appreciate it.
No, and thank you for being such gracious with your time. I look forward to many future conversations down the road. So, Jeroen, I know that you work with uh, businesses, companies, government bodies, and whatnot. Uh, what is your, to the audience, what is your advice as to how they can get hold of you, maybe your website or whatnot? We will definitely put all those links in the video too. And then maybe you want to just, as the very last thing, talk about what type of projects you are working on or want to work, and type of collaborations that you are seeking, so that people know the right kind of context to approach you and reach out to you.
Oh yeah, sure. Yeah, people can really or check me out online on my website. It's jeroenvandermoost.com, and maybe it's of course a Dutch difficult word, so or URL. So that's pretty convenient. It would be underneath the video, definitely. But also you can also add me on LinkedIn. Pretty much pretty active there, so you can really follow my work there. Also posting other projects that you or that I find inspiring, to inspire other people. And well, at the moment in my cooperations, they're quite broad. So it could be with non-profits, but also with universities, for example, but also with organizations like, for example, NVIDIA. So it's pretty broad, but what I'm always looking for is at the one hand that it's somewhere or has something to do around these themes that I work around. So these newer uses of technologies, to use technology in a different way, inspire people using technology, breed these deeper connections using AI technology between humans and nature. And ideally, I'm also looking in these cooperations for really synergy, in the sense that really, yeah, the people, the creativity, and the knowledge of the people in the organizations I work with, and my creativity can really, yeah, bring a project to a higher level. So if anyone's interested in some way to work with me, yeah, around that kind of projects, in that kind of projects, then yeah, please do reach out. Absolutely.
Thank you, Jeroen, for being such gracious, sir, with your time.
Thank you very
Truly
much.
an honor. I really had a lot of fun and looking forward to our future interactions.
My pleasure. Thank you very much. Looking forward to it, definitely. Thanks.